and welcome to BloombergQuint. We are continuing our series of conversations to try and understand what's happening on the ground in the midst of a 21-day national lockout. How are different constituencies dealing with it? How can design of a package be designed to provide them relief? Joining us right now for a conversation is Bindu Ananth, chair of the Dvara Trust. We are hoping to talk to her about the problems that SMEs would face, also last mile financing. Bindu, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. Can I start with a very broad question? You and your organization always has its ears to the ground. What are some of the immediate issues that are cropping up? We saw the government tackle some of them in terms of availability of food and some small cash transfers. But if you could talk us through what you're seeing and hearing from the ground.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Ira. I think the number one concern right now is just how to address the implications of the lockdown and how do we make sure that people have enough liquidity for their basic needs, particularly because so many people are, daily wage laborers, and since income has completely dried up, how do we really make sure these people stay well? So across all of our work, we are, of course, assessing what is the extent of the issue. And, of course, I think there are important differences between the urban poor and the rural poor. I hope we can speak about that later. And that requires a bit of a calibrated response. Quickly on, I think the measures that were announced today, very timely and I think definitely in the right direction. We can quibble about the amounts enough. That's certainly a concern. But I think it was important to act decisively and fast. So I'm glad those announcements were made. I think the big issue in our mind is to make sure that the last mile delivery issues are taken care of now that a bunch of both food as well as cash interventions have been announced. And I think we are missing a few details there that are important. For example, where will people go to withdraw the cash as and when it's transferred to their various accounts? I do think we need to think beyond bank branches and make sure that we don't overcrowd bank branches during this time. But how do we activate a lot more network points so that people can easily access that cash?
Okay, Bindu, let me tackle some of those individual issues now. And I'm going to actually start with the urban poor because I think, works were stopped. Migration, any reverse migration that had to take place will also stop because of the lockdowns. So I think the question being asked is how do you design the relief to them? Some parts get taken care of by the relief that is being offered to construction workers. But again, we picked up that it's not easy to transfer that money to their accounts and then allow them to get access to cash. Is that true? Sorry, Bindu, I think I lost you there for a minute. I was asking you, I think we've lost Bindu's line. We will try and get her back in just a minute, but I think she was detailing the initial set of problems, which is to get food and some cash into the hands of the most vulnerable. But as she was saying, there are still last mile delivery issues that one needs to take care of. A pertinent issue is that you can put money in the accounts of bank accounts of some of these people, but how do they get to those branches, particularly in the rural areas? It's not like you have a branch around the corner. Will you be able to the trip down? I think Bindu is back with us. Bindu, we lost you there. I think the second question I was asking you about was on the urban poor in particular, daily wage workers who have not been able to reverse migrate back as well. Do you see enough being designed for them? There's something specifically for construction workers that has been announced though.
Yes. So, I think that is a huge concern. It sounds like many people are stuck in the cities and not able to go back because of the transportation lockdown. And they may not be able to access bank accounts, etc., at the cities. So, I don't know the details of what's been announced, but I do think the construction sector is a key part of this. And if we can rope in the companies and the contractors to make sure that we are getting cash out also to those workers, I think that's a pretty important issue. A lot of the announcements today did seem to speak much more to the rural poor.
Bindu, is there enough of a microfinance network in among the urban poor, which could perhaps be used, with some exemptions to be made for their movements? But could that network be used to funnel money for these people?
Right. No, at this point, the idea should be that we tap every single network that's available to us, given the scale and scope of the issue. And in that context, certainly MFIs, I think business correspondents are a very important piece of the puzzle, Ira. And, for example, it's important to include them within essential services so that they can function. Remember, we have too few bank branches, so we can't just count on that. We need to keep the business correspondents open, both in the cities as well as the villages. Certainly the MFI points, the citizen service centers that are also quite ubiquitous. Really activate every single network that's available to us so that all of moves that have been made at the macro level can translate into real cash in hands of people.
Okay, and similarly at the rural level also, one should try and activate this BC network.
100%. So I think right now we are still sort of only thinking about bank branches, but there is, as we know, a huge last mile issue around accessibility to bank branches. So we don't have a scenario in which people have money theoretically in their accounts but are not able to get to it in time. So I think it's very important today to the business correspondents. Banks perhaps need to, like e-commerce companies are doing, announce better commissions so that they stay open for long and prevent overcrowding, but really get these last mile networks into the action. I think that's critical, and they have to be designated as essential services. They are permitted to function by the district administration. The other thing I wanted to say, Ira, quickly was in terms of, I think we all think about exclusion and, what about people who are not on any one of these lists? What about people who are not, able to access accounts? I think we need to keep watching that and calibrate to that. I think at this point we have people who have direct benefit transfers. There is a list around that. There is a list that has been created for Ayushman Bharat, the health insurance program. And importantly, we have an NREGS list. And I think the point with NREGS is not to increase wages and make people come to work, but to really use that as a targeting device to complement some of the other lists. And obviously there will be overlaps, etc., to worry about. But if at a district level we can cross these 3 or 4 lists and make sure that we are not leaving anybody out simply because they don't have a bank account, I think that's important.
Bindu, a bunch of people have raised the question about what happens to the unbanked. I don't know how one can even start to think about providing some relief to them.
So I think there are 2 points. One, I think even within the bank, I think the good news is that, we do have 85-90% of the population banked. They have a bank account. So that is certainly true, but that doesn't mean they can access the account, which is where everything that we talked about, including access to village level agents to disperse cash, is important, even for the bank. And I think the unbanked also represent a separate problem, and I think that's where we need to think about other networks. So construction companies, employers, I think will be an important part of the solution. Also, we should think through a process via perhaps the post office, which again is a fairly ubiquitous network, to say if your name is on a list, let's say the NREGS list, but you don't have a bank, you should be able to withdraw cash with some sort of simple process. I think we need to urgently design those because 10% in India is obviously a very large number.
Okay, that's an interesting idea. Certainly the postal network could be activated. Bindu, can I also request to understand from you what you think are the needs of the SME sector at this particular point in time? What would their most crying needs be?
Yes, so I think SMEs, particularly urban SMEs, have seen a collapse in demand, and given everything that's happened over the last week and will continue. So I think there are a couple of things that are important. One, I think most lenders have, either sort of suspended collections, effectively given them a moratorium, so there is some breather with respect to repayments. I think it would be good to formalize this via the RBI to say that here is some liquidity facility for lenders who serve SMEs. We understand that you are not going to get repayments, so here is a liquidity window for you. And in exchange, we ask that you provide a moratorium to your own clients. I think that's going to be important to make sure that all of the liquidity issues don't prevent the failure of these enterprises. I think the other thing we need to think about a little bit more is to say, other than debt-related issues, how do we make sure these SMEs keep their lights on? They're not firing people who work for them. I think there have been a number of proposals around that. But I think most urgently we need to make sure that they have breather on their liabilities, which is both bill payments as well as loan repayments.
So it would have to be both, because the discourse was dominated by, okay, let's give relief on asset classification beyond that 90 days, but more immediate requirement is sort of some sort of a liquidity line, which could be designed via the large public sector banks if required.
Absolutely. So I think because the classification issues are a little bit, red herring, particularly because most NBFCs, unlike banks, are already following India's. So in some sense, all of this is going to attract provisions and so on, irrespective of what we say on IGAP. I think most substantively, we need to make sure that lenders are able to proactively offer moratorium to their customers so that, they're not under added stress during the next few months, and make that a back-to-back condition with being able to avail liquidity facility.
Okay. Again, this would need to bring in some of the NBFCs as well, apart from, say, the PSU banks, which may have a certain network, but the NBFCs over the last few years have become more prevalent in the SME space as well. So it would have to be a combined effort between banks and NBFCs.
Yes, 100%. We have to make sure every time that we are designing these interventions that, banks as well as NBFCs are significant players. NBFCs growing importance in the SME unsecured lending space. So they have to be allies as we kind of work our way out of this.
Bindu, unfortunately, we don't have a very active system in terms of, trades, etc. Didn't pick up in a big way. But in this kind of a situation, maybe that wouldn't even help, because you wouldn't be actually selling any goods. So it would be tough to then discount that. But is there any role that those kind of platforms or the companies, the larger corporates which use SMEs can provide in this?
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I was asking whether the companies, the larger corporations who deal with SMEs can provide some sort of relief, or bill discounting platforms can have some role to play too.
Right. I think one is that, there have been lots of issues around delayed payments even in normal times. I think this would be a good moment for both corporates as well as governments to clear a lot of the dues, so that at least it provides, kind of some breather. But beyond that, you're right, given subdued economic activity, it's hard to imagine at this point how a threat-like platform can contribute. But I think in certain sectors, corporates and their supply chain, we should tap into them to reach the last mile, whether it's the business owner or the individual. How can they be channels of liquidity? I think that's worth thinking about.
Okay. Bindu, we've heard, in fact, just a few, half hour ago, heard the Tamil Nadu government say that collections have to stop. So they seem to have, from what I read on the Hindu, I don't have independent confirmation, have asked both MFIs and banks and small finance banks to stop collections. Then we heard from MFIN that a similar instruction has been made to other MFIs too. But this is happening in a piecemeal manner, because it's not like the RBI has said that we are going to, say that collections will stop, but we won't classify it as bad loans. Is this going to create a bit of confusion? Different states taking different rules?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is avoidable. I mean, we know the writing on the wall, which is why I think it's important for RBI to proactively put the message out to say we want lenders to suspend collections for a while, and here is what we are providing as support in terms of lenders managing their interim liquidity. I think if we don't move fast on this era, we're going to see more of this state-level interventions, and many entities are not collecting in any case because they are not able to send their people out. Branches are closed. At most, SMEs who have digital and e-NASH collections, they may be able to continue doing that. But again, the point is we want to liquidity for the customer at all costs. So I do think this vacuum will be a problem. RBI must address this urgently.
And some of these portfolios are securitized as well. How will this flow through that? You'll start to see rating downgrades on the securitized portfolios unless there's an exemption made from the RBI?
Some of those will happen, and frankly, at this point, Ira, I would say that we should not worry so much about classifications, etc. I think we want to substantively solve the underlying liquidity issue, both for individuals, SMEs, and lenders. And there is otherwise enough capital in the system to absorb some of the interim misclassifications, particularly if things go back to normalcy later. I think we want to target kind of the substantive issues.
Okay, understood. Just a word also on the funding environment right now. There was already risk aversion in the market, and it seems like it's been exacerbated by a couple of incidents. Do you think, so not just during the period of the lockdown, but raising money for non-bank lenders, especially smaller NBFCs, is that going to get tougher?
Yes, I think we are all preparing for tough times. So part of it was there was a expected dislocation in any case around the Yes Bank issue, but then this is only adding to everything. Many banks are postponing credit committees. They need to figure out how to conduct virtual credit committees, for instance. So there's definitely a dislocation on the funding side that everybody is expecting over the next few months. Again, some of that can be managed if there will be clear communication from RBI in terms of some backup liquidity, even if we are not talking about business going back to normal because our customers are also shut down. But I think we want to make sure that there is some minimum liquidity flowing through, and that just requires, I think, clear, timely communication.
And perhaps either a direct line through to RBI, which is not permitted right now, maybe via a large public sector bank or something, just to have the access to that liquidity if required.
Right. That's right.
Okay. Bindu, just as a last word, I had some questions in mind which I've thrown your way, but are there other red flags that you're seeing that you think need to be tackled with some immediacy?
Sorry, say that again, Ida?
No, I thought I'd check with you as a last question as to some other red flags that you may have noticed that we haven't picked up on yet, which you think need to be tackled immediately.
No, I think just to recap, I think we want to make sure that we are thinking about, now that we've made announcements, I think that were important, they were overdue, but really not to lose sight of the last mile implementation issue. And surely this is the beginning, which is why I'm not so concerned whether the 500 rupees is adequate. Clearly it's not adequate, but if we can use this first round to calibrate implementation and figure out last mile exclusion issues, then the next round of funding that goes through the system can also be more efficient. And I would really hope that we can follow that sort of ears to the ground iterative process.
All right. Bindu Ananth, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us, bringing you some of the issues that are playing out on the ground for the vulnerable section, but also the vulnerable businesses, some of who will need liquidity immediately. Thanks for watching BloombergQuint. Do stay tuned to BloombergQuint.com. We've got a lot of reading up there relevant to the current situation. Thanks.
According to a recent report, women today contribute nearly 74% of real estate buying decisions. This includes 32% of single women buyers across the top 8 cities. And finally, women are not just buying homes to live in, they're also investing in real estate.
think real estate definitely is the step above jewelry.
So it's my personal endeavor that Puravankara and Provident are the first choice or the first place women home buyers come to buy a home.
I think it's that feeling of kind of apna ghar.
Bali, here I come. Beda, check the weather in Bali. Passport? Where is my passport?
Today 23 degrees, tomorrow 24.
Not today or tomorrow, after 3 months. Khanna uncle is taking all of us to Bali. He has got some solid investment tip. Doubles the money in 3 months.
Let me guess. He's received some kind of hot SMS tip, right?
Correct. How did you know?
I receive such SMSs all the time.
Acha?
If these SMSs were reliable, we'd be on a world tour every 6 months, na? Papa, relying on anonymous SMS tip? Be prepared to take a dip.
So this won't be used at all?
Oh.
सोच कर समझ कर इन्वेस्ट कर
How many places can you be at once? What if we said 9? BloombergQuint Live. We are everywhere.